Scaling Blue Tech Ventures, the Do's and the Don'ts. And it's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Tobias Stapleton, Director, Blue Venture Forum, based in Newport, Rhode Island. Dr. Stapleton is a recognized leader in New England's blue economy ecosystem. He is the co-founder and director of the Blue Venture Forum, Inc., a venture capital forum which seeks to bring more private investment into blue tech. The BVF organizes both the Blue Venture Investment Summit and the Blue Innovation Symposium. Toby is an experienced executive and entrepreneur who has assisted founders and C-level executives to raise investment and commercialize technology. He is a frequent advisor to policymakers, economic development officials, and legislators on issues related to growing and sustaining blue economy ecosystems. Dr. Stapleton also serves as an assistant professor of decision and information sciences at UMass Dartmouth Charlton College of Business. A warm hand for Tobias Stapleton. Toby. Welcome to St. Andrews once again. Obviously, investor interest in blue tech startups is paramount. It's very key. And I guess an original question: what's driving that, in your opinion?
So, what we're seeing driving the interest in blue tech startups, certainly from the investment community, is about 2015 and 2016. You had a number of factors that came into play. First, there were a number of what we consider significant acquisitions in blue tech. Sort of the big one was Boeing purchasing Liquid Robotics, which started to show investors that there was a path to exit. So investors started to see sort of under the hood in terms of what an acquisition could look like, what valuations could look like, and beyond. On the other side of that, what was driving interest from the investment community wasn't just the money. It was also that they saw parallels with blue and clean tech, where clean tech had been 10 or 15 years ago and where blue was in 2015 or thereabouts. And so some of these investors who were clean tech, green tech investors saw that blue was an up and coming or emerging investment segment that was worthy of paying attention to. And that's about the time when we started to think deliberately about the way we both support investors and founders to connect with each other.
And what do the tech startups look like today, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marty. And if we think back 10 years ago, certainly about 10 years ago, I was running a technology incubator for the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And if you looked at the founders, we were a tech agnostic incubator, but we had a number of blue tech companies in the incubator because we were equidistant from the Naval Undersea Warfare Center and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And because of that, we had companies making autonomous underwater vehicles and comms underwater, acoustical modems and things like that. And if you look at the profile of the founders back then, it's not too different from today, but the founders back then were scientists. They had a technical background. They were postdocs or PhDs. And almost all of them were bootstrapped. There was very little, read no, equity investment in blue at the time, certainly in the US. And so these were bootstrapped founders, mostly working off of SBIR, so SBIR's SBIR in the US, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, non-dilutive grant funding to support the development of the technology. And so these scientists were working in the lab on a solution like underwater robotics, sensors, and beyond. And so the profile today is a little more diverse. One of the things that we have today that we didn't have back then is support mechanisms for entrepreneurs. Today, I used to say 7 years ago plus, there were zero really blue incubators or accelerator programs. Today in New England alone, there are 7 blue tech accelerator programs, and if we look globally, that number is exponentially larger. And those accelerator programs are providing the support to those technical founders to help them get those technologies out of the lab and into commercial hands, and also helping them to pitch better to investors. One of the things I did in preparation for this presentation was to talk to a few investors I know who are deploying capital in blue tech. And one of the things that they said across the board is that the quality of the pitches from founders today is significantly better. And one of the things in talking it through, we chalked it up to is the availability of these support programs like Creative Destruction Labs in Canada or Mass Challenge in the US and beyond.
Well, that was our baseball reference. I guess you partially addressed that. What does the blue tech startup need to have in their pitch deck when, again, pitching to investors?
Yeah, well, so, since Fred started us off with catchphrases and words that you'll hear, AI is the thing that all investors are, when they see it in your pitch deck, they will raise an eyebrow because everybody has AI in their pitch deck. And we work a lot with hardware companies that are developing hardware. And that used to mean that the software was a backseat, so the software was secondary. Today, investors want to know that you're thinking about the data that you're collecting and you're thinking about a business model around that, which means that you're thinking about a SaaS-based platform for the data, and you're thinking about how to integrate that with AI, and that you're going to be able to provide somebody with actionable information. We see this, from data startups like Salient Predictions, which is essentially a Woods Hole spin-out. Ray Schmidt, who's a researcher at Hui, won a NOAA prize about using ocean data, salinity and temperature, to make predictions about terrestrial rainfall and weather patterns and things. And so because of that, he raised $5 million, sort of unsolicited almost, from venture capital, to which allowed him to hire a professional CEO and build out the company. One of the things that those VCs looked for, though, is that Ray and his team had a plan for the data and that they were going to build a business model around that. So I think what we're seeing is that founders need to have an explanation about the why. So I think it may have been Jen LaPlante or somebody who said earlier, 10 years ago, founders were smart, they were technical founders, and they were the smartest people that they knew, who invented the coolest thing that they've ever seen. And that didn't exactly mean that there was a market for it. And so one of the things that you need to have, again, I think Fred said this in the beginning, is product market fit. And investors want to see that in the pitch deck.
Particular sectors like hardware or AI that investors are interested in. What did we touch on that?
Yeah, so in terms of blue, so maybe to back up, the blue economy is a big umbrella, and it includes everything from tourism, commercial fisheries, aquaculture, as we just heard, and defense and ocean observation, climate change research, et cetera. And we really have focused on the tech piece of that. And for a long time, the tech piece were the blue tech is companies that are developing the systems that address those big challenges in those verticals. And that meant hardware. Increasingly, it's software. And what we're seeing is energy. So marine energy, wave energy converters have been around for a really long time, but we're seeing hydrokinetic technologies, wave energy converters, and others become, the Department of Energy has, through the ARPA-E program in the US, has been not so quietly funding a number of marine energy companies for the last 10 to 15 years. Those companies are now getting to, it's a small handful of them, but they're getting to grid scale, or at least semi-grid scale, so that they're actually deployable in an environment that means something other than just to a government entity who's looking to fund that. So we're seeing energy. We're certainly seeing this nexus of marine biology and traditional biotech and biopharma. So this blue biotech sector is something that is nascent, but it's gaining interest from from the beginning. It's sort of the marine biological laboratories, now the University of Chicago, which is adjacent to Hui on Cape Cod. It's been working on a number of things related to really what we would today call marine biotech. So those are some: marine energy, marine biotech, but defense is back again. We sort of, as we saw horizontalization of markets, so NOAA has more funding over the last couple of years for sensors. The Department of Energy through ARPA-E and other programs has been deploying money, but defense, especially with the war in Ukraine and beyond, we're seeing the use of drones and autonomous systems and the importance of that in those wars.
Well, what advice would you give to a blue tech startup that's trying to raise capital, Toby?
Well, one, be careful on how you use AI in your pitch deck. If you don't actually know what AI is, which I've seen a few founders that put AI in, figuring nobody's going to question them about that, and then the investors dig in and they sort of lose their footing. One is, so be careful in your use of artificial intelligence, but two, really have that pitch around product market fit honed, that you know the solution, you know the problem you're addressing, and how your solution is going to be commercially viable. This isn't, because a lot of these founders are used to the grant environment where they've gotten SBIRs, non-dilutive grants from the government or from agencies or academic institutions. They don't always have a good pitch about that product market fit. And they need to. When you're pitching an equity investor, you need to have a clear narrative about how you're going to make money with the thing that you're doing.
All right, this is pardon me, folks, of all times to get a dry throat. This is very interactive, so we're encouraging people to come to the microphone at this part of the Fireside chat. If any questions, please come up for Toby Stapleton here at this part of the panel. Do we have any questions in the room today? And thank you for the questions, Toby, as well.
Okay.
Merci
So,
beaucoup.
just what would be the expectation of an investor from a return on investment of a going rate right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that, I have a slide tomorrow that I'm going to present. That one of the things that we did is we went into PitchBook 2 years ago and last year, and we did an autopsy on blue deals, which is really tough because in PitchBook and some of the others, you can't use blue as a keyword to search. You have to sort of get clever about what you're looking for. And we put a table together about exits. And Liquid Robotics, $300 million. Anduril bought a company in Massachusetts 2 years ago for $50 million, $35 million. And these are great numbers for blue tech. When I show these numbers to traditional tech investors, they say things like, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning for an exit like this. Why would we bother? And so first, just a commentary, it's really about finding the right investors because we have a wide range of investors who are coming into blue, from private investors who have raised capital specifically for blue tech to family offices who were investing in climate and related, who are now moving into to blue. So we're seeing some of the exits are in the 3 to 5x range, and almost all of the exits to date have been acquisitions. We've had a few IPOs, really small floats that, in at least one case, really didn't work out for the founders. They raised, they went public on the Australian stock. It was a U.S. company, went public on the Australian Stock Exchange, and within 3 years they had sort of blown apart. But not compared to other sectors, not great multiples yet, if that helps. But here's the ray of sunshine, if there is one. The ray of sunshine is that if you look at a lot of these founders, they haven't raised a whole lot of external capital. They've bootstrapped. So when, like, one of our companies was a company that made autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs or UUVs as the government calls them, and they exited to L3, now L3 Harris, but they exited to L3 for about $26 million, which you think, well, that's not that much. But when you think about it, it's really just two founders and a couple investors who were in for tens of thousands of dollars, not millions, right? And so it's relative, but it's a good question because it's a nascent industry, and we're trying to get more investors into the space by explaining what it looks like today, if that answers.
Monsieur Chopin.
Yes, in the turquoise economy, we are not selling a piece of software or a piece of AI now, or we are not in telecommunication. So potential investors are not there because our things take longer. It's not a return on investment of 1 year. It takes longer. It's not a question of patent. I cannot patent the life cycle of a species that I know how to grow faster, but I have many years of know-how. So are we taking in consideration the know-how, the time to grow the market, and all these things? And it's mean a return of interest that is not immediate. And I think it's a big problem.
It is a problem. It is a good question, because if we look at those different segments of the blue economy, they're not equal, right, in terms of where they are from a development perspective. In southern New England, where we got our start, we have a strong defense focus. What was is still a defense focused ecosystem. Something like 80% or 85% of the UAVs bought by the U.S. Navy are manufactured in that corridor from Connecticut, which is a traditional submarine building ecosystem, through Cape Cod. That ecosystem is really built out, and it's populated by what we call the primes. And then Anduril bought this large displacement underwater autonomous vehicle. In other sectors like aquaculture, like for instance, when we say aquaculture in southern New England, it's a lot of family-owned farms that are raising enough. It's really a lifestyle business, and they don't have the money to deploy tech on their beds or out in the water where they're growing the mussels or the oysters, more likely. And so the development there is not, a few years ago, I worked with a Hui researcher who invented a scope that would be deployed in aquaculture. At least this is what he thought. The problem with the scope is that it cost $60,000 and it needed to be tied into a system. No aquaculture farm in New England, never mind Vietnam or other places, is going to have the funding to deploy that scale and scope of tech, and they wouldn't have the know-how to build a system out. So it's a challenge with the maturity of these different verticals within blue. I'm not. Part of it is pulling research out of universities, but researchers are not great at the commercialization side, right?
Thanks very much for your answer, Toby. That answered my question, so I'll pivot. What you said is very interesting about the involvement of the defense and national security communities in high tech and innovation. And it looks to me as if the blue economy writ large, however defined, is much more advanced in the US than it is here in Canada. And I attribute part of that to what you've mentioned about Department of Defense, Pentagon, and its involvement in things like drones and good Lord knows what else. I had the sense in Canada that our armed forces are nowheresville in terms of blue economy. It's the contrast with the Americans is quite striking. InQtel is the CIA's venture capital arm. It's got a couple investments, co-investments here in Canada that I'm aware of, but they're very active in the US. And so my question, after a long speech, is Department of Defense, in our case, Defense Department, contribution necessary for the rapid fire development of the blue economy, given the exit multiples that you were talking about, 3 to 5 times, that are not quite what some venture capitalists are looking for in terms of return multiples. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a great question, and and it's the subject of a panel at next year's conference. But the short answer is that the fund, and I work as part of DARPA and InQtel's embedded, separately from my role at the Blue Venture Forum. I'm an embedded entrepreneur for DARPA's Embedded Entrepreneur Initiative. So I work with DARPA-funded companies to help them find non-defense markets for their defense tech, right? And you've got defense as a whole animal unto itself. You've got InQtel, you've got Shield, you've VC, you've Squadra, on and on. VCs that have been created just in the last few years alone that are really, that, you know, they have blue as part of their thesis, but it's really very narrow, you know, tracks, drones and AI. And, you know, in InQtel, I think if you look at their portfolio of companies, certainly less on the drone side, but certainly on the AI and data analytics, what we would call data analytics in the past. And I think the funding, you know, to a certain extent, the government funding is great, whether it's, you know, SBIR funding or other transactional authorities in the US and beyond. The challenges with defense tech is that, you know, like Anduril, you know, Bloomberg has been writing a lot and focused a lot on, and Anduril, it's worthy of a read if you're interested in defense tech. They're trying to take you know, a different approach than the primes have taken. The primes innovate through acquisition. So if you get SBIR funding as an entrepreneur and you prove your tech out that it actually is deployable by the Navy and they're going to build what's called a program of record, one of the primes will just buy you. I mean, they'll come in and dump a bag of cash on your desk and buy you out. You'll be locked up for 3 years on a contract, and then you'll go off and do your next thing. It limits the growth of the sector. I think, you know, and programs of record and selling to the Navy are different animals than commercial contracts. So I work with companies who are selling, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of kit. You know, Huntington Ingalls Industries sells a Remus for a couple $100,000, which is a vehicle, to the Navy, and commercial researchers or academic researchers. You know, well, I work for UMass Dartmouth, and we have a Remus that's on loan from the Office of Naval Research, right? Because it's so expensive that a research institution we can't afford it on our own. So it really limits your thinking. You're not going to develop a low-cost Remus, because why would you? You've got the Navy. This is just an example of one company. It's not to pick on HII, but it limits the growth of the blue tech sector by just having those dollars, and it limits your path to exit, because really your you know, Elbit or L3 Harris or Lockheed is going to be your path to acquisition and exit. If that, we'll put a panel together. I'll talk to Fred. Fred will put a panel next.
Yeah, so I think Richard already, you know, asked part of my question, but very quickly. I know New England, you guys are doing a lot in that ecosystem. So the question is, how often do you encounter Canadian entrepreneurs, you know, startups who come to pitch and all of that? If you look at New England and the whole of the US versus Canadians, how often do you encounter them? However you want to calibrate that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, for me, every day, you know, one of the DARPA EEI companies I'm working with is actually a company that is based in Canada, Halifax, Canada. They have an office in Colorado, which is where they got the DARPA funding. But I'm also a mentor for Creative Destruction Labs' Atlantic track, which is based out of Dalhousie. So there's a large Canadian proportion there. But the programming we do, which includes the Blue Innovation Symposium, which is an annual event, and the Blue Venture Investment Summit, which is a semi-annual event. It happens in Rhode Island in the spring. It's February, but let's call it spring. And in the fall, it takes place in conjunction with Gulf of Maine Ventures, which is part of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. So different ecosystem. Both of those programs have at least 20% of the companies who participate. And the Blue Innovation Symposium is between 350 to 400 attendees each year. 20% of those companies are Canadian companies. I think one of the things I'll mention, since it's come up, everyone, as far as I can tell, looks at everybody else's ecosystem, and it's a grass is always greener on the other side, and thinks that everyone else is doing better. I was on, a call with the group in Plymouth, England, that's got a blue robotics lab, and they were talking about how lucky we are in the United States, and we were calling them because we're looking to copy some of what they're doing in their ecosystem. And Canada really punches above its weight. When we did a program on the Arctic, and when you look at that like U.S. companies to do business in the Arctic, it's sort of they struggle, but the Canadian institutions that are already doing research work in the Arctic is significant, especially if you look at the universities as well as the support structure from the Ocean Supercluster to COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship, and beyond. It's not just a maritime province thing. You've got a group in Quebec, which I'm drawing a blank on the name of. You've got the West Coast is coming along. So there's a lot of Canadian participation in the things that we do.
I guess one final question, Monsieur Chauffin.
Yes.
Bienvenue.
I was wondering, when you put the defense on the Navy economy in the picture of the blue economy, I think the risk is because it all depends what we have in mind when we think about blue economy and what the picture come. But when you add the defense on the Navy, because the scale of the budgets are completely different. Is there not a risk of dwarfing the other classical blue economy, more environmental biology incline? And when I look at the color of all the navies of the world, I don't know, I think squeezing, and it's not squeezing because it's very important budget, but entering a Navy and defense budget, I mean, I would be much more comfortable if you were calling it the gray economy, but not the blue economy.
Yeah, well, and again, our ecosystem definitely has, we have the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, traditional submarine building ecosystem in Connecticut, as I mentioned, and a lot of the things that we did in the beginning definitely had a defense focus. Our provost at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth is working through a $5 million grant through the Office of Naval Research and Newark today. But if you look at defense spending, again, drones, sort of defense spending is back. We got away from our program. From a programmatic standpoint, we were spending a decent amount of time over the last couple years on these DOE, NOAA, and other agency funding opportunities that I mentioned. But Navy's coming back, but Navy is also concerned about the way that the offshore wind is driving some excitement in our ecosystem, and whales. Marine life monitoring is a thing, and the Navy cares about this too. The effect of sonar systems on marine life, or the effect of being able to operate and navigate in environments without impacting marine life is something that they care about and that they spend money to develop systems, or to think through and develop systems around. So I sort of look at this, from a glass half full perspective, in that, for sure, maybe it should be a gray economy and not a blue economy, but a lot of those defense, initially funded defense projects have trickled down to commercial application into sector, like the much maligned and still maligned oil and gas sector and beyond. But it's only a matter of time before those, start to get deployed in aquaculture, which is, you have Cook Aquaculture. You've got companies like Innova Sea and others that build, they acquire, they invest in technology. They serve on CDL, Creative Destruction Labs. Two fellow mentors are from David Kelly and Mark Jollymore from Innova Sea. So they're actively looking at innovation in their space. So, and maybe that's a panel for next year's conversation too, Marty.
Well, this is the inaugural. It sounds like sure. Thank you. Let's have a warm hand for Toby Stapleton, ladies and
thank you.
gentlemen. And thank you for your questions.